this first session, we're going to talk about the rise of systems built out of inexpensive hardware and commodity hardware and free or inexpensive software at the expense of the established players. Television post-production has always been thought of as special rather than specialist, with special boxes from special vendors costing very special money. Now with Avid, Quantel and Autodesk arguably no longer the forces they were, Adobe doing very well, but with the jury still out on Apple's long-term plans, we now have people building systems out of this commodity hardware, affordable pro components and inexpensive or free software. Post houses are having to compete hard for big budget projects. On lower budget jobs, they're being undermined by loose collectives of people working remotely from each other on their own equipment and using internet-based services to collaborate. Ours is an increasingly disrupted marketplace. So, what do we think? What have we seen? What works and what has failed? And is the cloud, where work can be stored, shared, rendered, even edited online, the answer to many of our current post-production industries' concerns? My name's Colin Birch. I'm from Informed Source. And here to answer my questions and yours are Steve Sharman, CTO of Technology Problem Solvers Mediasmiths, and Ben Roeder, also a CTO of SohoNet, who are experts in connectivity and data management for the media and entertainment industry. So my first question to... you can choose which one of you takes it. Overall, in which direction is the post-production industry heading in terms of its key product and service developments? Who'd like to take that one first?
Should I take it? Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Can I just ask a quick question first? Who here is either in or kind of loosely connected to the, quotes, post-production industry? Right. Okay, thanks. It's actually a really good question. I think post is a really, really tough market now. I think in general, broadcast is actually a really tough market at the moment. But I think it's very, very tough for post at the moment because as we've seen over the last kind of 24, 48 hours, there's a kind of a very allied part of the industry, visual effects, where it seems like suddenly all of the big and best players are actually disappearing out of the marketplace very quickly because they're being squeezed between things like subsidies and demands of the studios, the expectation that you'll go in at very low cost, the requirement to actually spend an awful lot on technology, and a number of factors like that. So I think the post-production market is kind of either getting to almost the same crisis point or has been there for quite a long time, because we've seen a number of quite well-known names disappear off the rosters over the past 6, 9, 12 months. And it's kind of a big question, because when you look at the cost basis of those organisations, there's a real question as to how much of it is down to having to pay for really expensive real estate in Soho, how much is it that actually it's a talent-led business and you've got to pay the market rate for the talent, and how much is it that we've been held at this kind of quite high price point for what is is generally very good kit, but kit which hasn't really kind of taken on the fact that that things have changed in technology over the past few years. So there's kind of a big question around, big debating point for the audience almost, which is, given that you can almost build kind of big edit facilities now out of commodity-based technology, why is it that we're still actually paying a lot of money to people like Avid and Quantel and their likes for what is essentially what should be a commoditized piece of kit? I mean, interesting to see our friends from Adobe over there. They've got a very different direction in the marketplace. So I mean, it's just kind of question, because I think we're trying to get this to be a little bit interactive. Is why do people think that that we're still kind of got this broadcast mentality where actually we should be trending towards more commodity tech?
Ben?
One of the things I'd say is there's more than one post-production industry. I mean, you've got the film side of stuff, you've got the commercial side of it, you've got the broadcast side of it, and then you've got the reversioning and those sorts of processes. They're all going in different directions. I mean, there's some commonality between them, but high-end visual effects, that has a very different base of software and the amount of people that you're applying to stuff and the timescales that you're working on stuff. Whereas commercials, once again, different. And what you're seeing is them going in different directions. I mean, you're seeing the consistent price pressure across all of them. And you're seeing the large visual effects companies, as you're saying, going away, or depending on which territory they're in, moving to
Going
where there's
somewhere
different
else,
tax
yeah.
breaks. Montreal's the current one that you see lots of people moving
Just
towards.
sticking to broadcast for a moment, is one of the elements of this the way that the market priced itself, the way that post houses priced themselves for jobs, which was based on the price of the kit that they bought?
I'd say that's very true. I mean, one of
Yeah.
the things that post houses have traditionally done is problem solve productions, and that's not something that they traditionally charge. Well, it's not
Yeah.
on their traditional sheets. And that's what you're seeing as part of the DPP process, is them actually sticking the producers pack together so that they can actually quote on jobs, so that the quote sheet actually has stuff that's relevant to the industry now, not the stuff that was in the past that they didn't quote for.
That's a really good point. I think post houses have, in particular, have always been very kind of client service oriented. And whilst the margins have been a bit higher, they've been able to absorb a lot of that kind of client service and the additional technology costs within the cost of different jobs. But I think there's relentless pressure downwards from the broadcasters to the production companies down to the post companies, and this kind of massive trend within, I think, a lot of production companies that say, why are we paying these post guys to do a job that we think we can do internally? Quite often the answer is because they have a bunch of skills that production companies actually don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of movement puts more and more pressure on. I think you're absolutely right that we know of a number of situations where people are literally bidding jobs at cost on the old kind of model of well, if we bid it at cost now, then we'll be able to recover our margins later, and it never happens because the margins just go down.
And then you're also seeing the broadcasters insourcing the production side of stuff, so you're actually seeing the whole train moving back up into the broadcaster or the commissioner.
Yeah.
But that's so cyclical. We've seen the big production companies, that what are now the super indie production companies. They take it in house, then they find that's too expensive, and then so they outsource it again, and it's in out. But one of the sort of aspects of this that still endures is there a substitute? Is there a real substitute for having a group of talented people, everyone from the management of the company, through the facilities management, through the people that run the technology, through to the talent on the tools themselves, all being under one roof, in one location, providing a fully integrated service where it's warm in the centre of town?
I think it's. I think it depends on. You mentioned kind of cyclical. I wonder whether it's becoming a generational thing, because I think there's a generation of producers, directors, and creative executives who expect that kind of full service approach. And I think there's also a whole group of people growing up through the chain who are very used to using kind of commodity IT. I think one of the really interesting sort of trends that we're starting to see is kind of two things. One is that by necessity, the kit within broadcast is starting to look and behave better. And when I say look and behave better, it's starting to look as if it was actually designed to be used by human beings as opposed to people like me. Because believe me, having user interface defined by somebody like me is really not a good idea. But the other trend is that you're getting people you're getting sort of people who are very, very comfortable with initially sort of things like Final Cut Pro and now increasingly things like Adobe Premiere, and they can make it sing and do things that we'd never seen years ago.
I mean, what we've seen if you look at the feature film productions and that side of stuff, you see them insourcing and taking visual effects shots themselves. So you're seeing a high end taking the stuff in-house, and you're seeing the low end taking it in-house, and then there's the middle, which is slowly being squeezed together.
Squeeze middle.
We're all the squeezed middle at the moment.
Quite
Just before we move on to the next question, which follows on very neatly from that, does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, we'll just move on to this next point, which is, bearing all of that in mind, what have you seen technology-wise in recent times that's really grabbed your attention, and why?
I think there are a number of different things. I think I think one thing that's kind of grabbed us a lot recently has been the Adobe's Anywhere. It's not actually released to the market yet, but we've been playing with it for a number of months, as have other people in broadcasters and production companies. And the fact that that here's a solution which is allowing you to initially move away from having really kind of expensive infrastructures within places. In order to deliver post services, that's kind of a big change, and kind of centralising it back on just a group of servers and a bit of storage. Then I think the next evolution for that for Adobe has got to be actually getting that into the field. So first step, within the enterprise, reduce the cost of delivering some of these technologies. Second step, getting it out into be able to access hosted internally anywhere from outside. So where you've got, for example, at the moment, a lot of organisations having to shift tapes around to the different country-based subsidiaries to do versioning and languaging, do all that from one place. And then I think there's kind of an ultimate for that, which is something that that I think they're already thinking about, which is can you start to put that kind of technology into things like the Amazon cloud? So you start to get away from the establishment costs of actually having a high-end facility, because you just turn it on when you need it. Now that's kind of a really glib thing to say, and it's kind of dependent on one dirty secret that the kind of cloud providers never really talk about, which is that in order to make that happen with really high quality video, you've got to have really, really fat pipes to get it up there in the first place and then back down again when you've finished it. But that's starting to happen.
How? Just to put that into context.
I was going to say Ben might have a word about that.
No, well, exactly. Just to put that into context, how fat do you determine is fat in terms of the pipes?
It's kind of a difficult one, because we kind of always say that you don't start literally don't start shifting high quality video around if you want to do it in reasonable timescales with less than kind of a gigabit of connectivity, which is nowadays that's really realistic at a sensible price point. We've seen for years these kind of demos of people sort of shooting all day, and then they're going to upload all their footage to the cloud from their hotel room. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't even get onto email from a hotel room.
No.
Never mind about shoot.
I have tried doing that, and it just simply
bollocks,
utterly doesn't work.
My online backup doesn't work from my laptop.
You give up after 10 minutes and go to the bar.
But the reality is, once you've actually got it there, if you're able to kind of work with it and conform it and do things to it with cloud-based tools, and then increasingly be able to shift it to distribution and to play out within the network, and not have to send it through your own kind of video infrastructure back at base, then you're starting to get towards something that's actually quite powerful.
Okay, Ben.
Once again, I'd also agree with the Adobe stuff, also the Quantel QTube stuff,
absolutely.
and the Zinc Render stuff, which is all similar sorts of concepts where you're working on stuff remotely, where you're sticking all of the engine in the middle, so that it's more of an operational cost rather than a capex cost when you're starting to build these things, which then gets you onto your point of having systems that you can turn on and off remote when you actually need it. Then when you're actually talking about the capacity in and out, I'd say I'd agree with Steve. Gigabit is at least where you want to start at. And then as you start to scale things out, we've been doing a couple of things with our utility storage products where we have big storage systems in the middle. They're very, very high performance. And people want to just trickle things in. And you need to have an awareness of how long it takes to copy data. If you're talking about copying 4 or 5 terabytes a day, you need a pretty big pipe to be able to do that. And you actually need some reasonable equipment. That's not completely commoditized.
Knowing what we know, how realistic, if you're working remotely, as we're describing here, and collaborating in this way, how realistic is it for that you can actually get a gigabit connection to wherever it is that you are?
Depends where you are.
I've been asked for connections to Rwanda before.
Unless you're in a metropolis, let's go. Unless you're in London or another major city.
Well, I think Ben could talk about their network, I'm sure. But I mean, if you talk about kind of the commodity providers, then a guy at BT said to me not long ago that actually we now don't worry about the backhaul because we've got we're fibered up to the eyeballs from all the exchanges. We've got as much backhaul as we need. Now, whether you quite believe that is a different question. But what it does mean is that if you can solve the kind of the last mile problem in some way, then actually you could have pretty good connectivity almost wherever wherever you are. I mean, obviously, that's within a kind of a major sort of high technology country like the UK. It's probably different in different places.
But it depends on where you are, though. I mean,
Yeah.
at the weekend I was in Lincolnshire. There's no connectivity there. This whole future iPlayer and all that sort of stuff, the best connectivity they could get was 1 megabit a second.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I live in
that's-
Lincolnshire, so I can vote for
my,
that.
as Steve, my son's at Lincolnshire University. I had to buy him a MiFi for him to get a decent
And
connectivity in his digs.
Well, that's a bit pants because it's supposed to be better in the centre of
It's
Lincoln.
not that great.
yeah, and you just see that. Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you are. When we build connectivity into the places where people are the media hubs, so we're in the film studios, we're in the TV studios, we're in the post-production companies, we're in the service offices, we're in the broadcasters, we're in the advertising agencies, we're the places that are consistently moving stuff around. If you want a gigabit, there's places in LA, there's places in London, there's places in New York, Australia that you can just walk in and we can provide that almost instantly for you. And they're the places that people are doing production. If you're talking about in the middle of the Yorkshire Dales, no.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Lincolnshire, no.
So really, what we're talking about is people working remotely and collaborating, but doing it as kind of using bureau services rather than their kitchen tables. Realistically,
Yeah, and that's and interesting enough. I mean, that's that. Like everything else, that's just kind of reinventing the wheel because the old model for say football league used to be that you'd take it to the local sort of ITV network hub and play the camera down the line when you're finished. So it's what is past is prologue again.
yeah.
But, so just on, I think just on one other thing, Colin. Just while I think about it, I think one of the things that we've seen that I think is actually really interesting, which isn't actually technology, but it's technology related, is there's starting to be a real rise in people who actually really understand how to get sort of broadcast quality out of commodity technologies. So that's not people like us because we look at the high-level building blocks, but it's actually people who can look at, say, IBM disk arrays and GPFS and Cisco networking and really understand it in a broadcast environment and understand how to tune it and get the best out of it. So you're actually effectively getting what you used to. So there's a reason why a lot of that kit was in the kind of what we still think of as kind of legacy kit is so expensive. Partly because the market would pay it, but partly because there's a lot of R&D and configuration work that's gone into it in base to make sure it works and make sure you've got supported configurations. But I think we're starting to see now the rise of people who understand how to do that with, I wouldn't necessarily say kind of your Netgears off the shelf from PC World, but you look at the guys that places like Candid Media used to be sort of I think part IBM, part VRT, who built this kind of media data center concept and now quite successfully rolling it out all over the place. That's quite exciting because it means we get a lot more for either the same money or a lot less.
And that is one of the things that comes with the commoditization over time. Single disk now will do 120 megabytes a second. But that used to be a really hard problem. And as they commoditize, they become less of a problem. So the systems that you then end up building are about how one goes about scaling those.
Before we move on to the next point, which is about things that haven't worked quite so well, in terms of the software side of these new developments, how much of it is free, open source technology, software, and how much of it is stuff that you still have to pay for and buy, whether it's pay for it outright or subscribe to it?
I think we're now at the stage where you can increasingly make a decision because if you look at a lot of the infrastructures that are starting to go into places, they're either for a long time large proportions of them have been based on open source software. Linux, for example, and just kind of core network services like DHCP, DNS, all that kind of stuff. That's increasingly done with free services. I think what we're starting to see is people being able to really make the choices where they put their investment and what they're actually paying for. So it's not just you're not just paying, for example, for a file system because you have to. You're paying for it because actually it's giving you performance and reliability, and you want the kind of the Quantum or the IBM name to be able to go and squeeze when necessary. But for a lot of the rest of it, it's you'll go and get Linux off the shelf, and you make your decision as to whether you pay Red Hat for it or you get CentOS, because it's exactly the same damn thing.
Yeah, and we're very large users of open source, but we also pay for stuff. It's a question of how much time you have to invest in stuff, how polished the systems are. If you're talking about operating systems, the open source stuff is definitely there and it's been there for a long time. As you start going further and further up into the application stack, things like FFmpeg are fantastic. There are intellectual property issues to do with some parts of those. They're generally ignored by most people. But as you go further, and the interface of that's not very good, but as you go further and further up the stack, you get, I think the user interface point that you made earlier tends to be.
Is it fair to say
issue.
the further you get up the stack, the more advisable it is to pay for something that you know has support?
I think it's different. I think it's you pay for support on those things that you have to rely on, and also you start to do things in a much more rigorous way. So I mean, if you think about, we worked for a number of years on BSkyB's Tapeless project. Now the core parts of the absolute core of that are things like Ardendo and Rosette, Viz and Rosette and DDN, IBM storage and GPFS. All stuff which is relatively sort of high priced and you're paying for it. There's a reason you're paying for that. The kind of core pieces that hang it all together, that move that basically handle the workflows, that sort of interface all of the systems, they're all open source components. Now Sky pays for commercial support on those open source components, but the reality is that they're open source. And with things like the user interface, I think the industry's starting to catch up and deliver decent UIs, but the reality is that most of them are actually pretty terrible. And we're actually we're finding that that's increasingly an area that clients want to pay for, because it used to be that this whole idea of having custom software was a bit of a dirty word, and it just isn't anymore. It's people want the things that they need to do their job, and if they can be supported and well understood and well put together, and they don't fall apart every 5 minutes, then does it matter whether it's a package or whether it's custom?
The big thing, if you're building large systems, you end up using a hell of a lot of open source, and you end up using a lot of glue to string stuff together, and things like languages like Ruby, Python, and Perl along those lines, which are open source languages that come with massive libraries, enabling you to glue these systems together really quickly, and also enabling you to build nice interfaces in the web, as you're moving to web interfaces for that sort of stuff, which are not the right interface for all things in the media industry, but for a lot of stuff, it's a very easy way to generate dashboards and that sort of stuff, so that you can see what's going on and people can monitor it.
Without wishing to sort of focus on the negative too much, are there any things that should have perhaps worked that haven't quite come out as they were intended?
Yeah, I think there's. I think some of those. There are a lot of things that we probably tried a few years ago and had some very, very high expectations of, and possibly a lot of people didn't quite understand what they were getting into. So I'm thinking of this kind of cycle that the big mainstream IT vendor. I used to work for IBM. And those sorts of companies go through a kind of a cycle every 4 years or so of saying, okay, so media's a big market. It's got to be lots of servers and storage in there, big service line. Kind of about 3.5 years later, just as they're starting to really understand the industry. And get over some of the disasters of the first year or so, where it's just, well, sell it. What's video? It must be fine. Then they decide that they realise they're actually not making any money, and they shut it down again until 6 months later, when somebody says, "Oh, media, that must be a big market." So I think there's I think we probably, those of us who have kind of advocated commodity IT for a long time, probably haven't helped ourselves by having some early projects which didn't deliver what we expected to for various different reasons.
Biggest disappointment? I can't believe it's 2013 and you're using web browsers and some of them still don't support files bigger than 2 gig, which is just a ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you can't upload large files in, well, Internet Explorer. I mean, that's starting to change massively now, but it's disappointing after all this time.
Long end.
Is that lack of development initiative from them? From the browser developers?
It's
I mean, it tends to be still a niche area, because when you talk to people about uploading large files, they go, what, 100 gig? You go, no. 3, 10 gigabytes? I'd like to do half a terabyte. Why is this an issue?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really interesting sort of whole area of its own. That that the whole promise of I think we used to have these sort of pre-briefings at IBC and NAB at IBM where you'd sort of where people would come in and brief us as to what we were going to be talking about that show, and I would often look at each other and say, well, that's okay. So we're talking about that, so that'll probably be mainstream in about 3 years. Because we're always relatively good at thinking about something which is quite good, slightly ahead of before the technology be able to deliver it, and I think that's where we are a lot of the time with what we call things like HTML5 technologies. I think there's a big sort of expectation that we can have big, rich clients just running in browsers. And I think there's some really exciting things coming along, like the ability to have things like video conferencing without any browser plugins. That's quite cool for things like news gathering and even kind of remote presence and stuff like that. But it's you wouldn't bet your business on it right now.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think you should.
Interesting things on that sort of stuff is this will be the first year that we are doing SIGGRAPH Electronic Cafe, where we're actually doing it without any browser plugins. And we do actually have it working with large file uploads and that sort of stuff. In the past, it's always been Java. You have to Java or various other plugins that you had to download, which then turn you into a desktop support organisation, which you don't generally want to be.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
interesting. But going back to what you were saying earlier, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the faults, if that's the right word to use, of the big vendors is that they look at this industry and they think that there's plenty of money slushing around.
Well, media's disproportionate because we all read newspapers, we all watch telly, we all go on the web. So it feels like a much bigger industry than it actually is. I mean, one of the key problems something that we sometimes say when we're talking about things like media asset management projects is that we've probably seen or been involved in or rescued most of the big disasters in media management projects over the past 10 years. And a lot, there are lots of things analysis you can do on why projects like that fail, and a lot of them are down to the fact that when you actually look at our industry, I think this came up at a talk quite recently, that there are no big software vendors at all. Even sort of the big guys like your sort of Uvizzes, they're tiny compared to the actual size of the market. And one of the small and tiny vendors are even more prevalent than that. But we all sort of have businesses which are kind of bet on that size of vendor, and partly that's great because we get really good stuff and it helps to differentiate in the marketplace. Partly it's a massive problem because typically you win a project with a big vendor, with a big broadcaster. All the people go onto that, and then suddenly all the people are onto the on the next job. We've done a number of kind of small projects for a couple of people around the place where we said, no, you should go back to the vendor for that. Well, we would, but they can't come back to us for 6 months. And that's just ridiculous.
Then they do seem to sometimes struggle to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just nature of business, isn't it, really?
Well, and this is where you end up with people actually having their own developers in-house, and you end up writing the glue, sticking the systems together yourself.
Now, just for the last sort of 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, we're going to move on to that thing they call the cloud, and whether you want to discuss private cloud first, public cloud first, or just lump it all in together.
The C
how
word.
And where can the cloud be usefully employed to improve post-production workflows? That's a very, very leading question, I know, but who'd like to pick that one up first?
What do you define as a post-production workflow?
Well, all right, I'll go back to the original thing. People working primarily in terms of this conversation which we're having about disruption, the ability to work remotely and collaborate while using the cloud as your storage repository and
Okay.
the place where you do
I think
your
that
rendering and so on and so forth.
that's a really good, so that's a really interesting distinction. So I think, and I think experience is starting to tell a little bit at the moment that like a lot of businesses, post houses can actually give themselves a lot of efficiencies by shifting things like their exchange servers and their sales systems and their booking systems and so on into cloud-based environments. And to a certain, and taking away some of the pain of running those things. Whether we're yet ready, either on a kind of an internal basis or on a public basis, to run things like rendering. I think rendering's different because there are some good examples of how that's already happening. Certainly for the kind of animation and effects market.
That's been happening for many
absolutely,
years. They
yeah.
used to be
But
called
post,
render services.
I'm not sure many people can point to. I think if any of the guys from Doc 10 were in the audience, I think they'd argue because they'd say they are running a private cloud for providing Avid across Media City, but I can't really think of many at the moment workable models where you've got really sort of full quality systems in the cloud, which means that you don't have to have those things in your own premises.
Okay.
But I will be disagreed with.
And we
Please.
did some stuff on this quite a few years ago on Little Dorrit, which would be. I mean, it's distance working, and it was so that you had remote screens that were at Pinewood, and that's where all of the screens and the talent was. But all of the machines were in Soho, and all of the media was in Soho. So you're extending this stuff out. You can
that's the
take
cloud.
the same. You can take the same model and just centralize it somewhere else, so that the people that own the equipment's different. I mean, cloud and that sort of stuff's much more about a business model change and operational cost exchange for capital side of it. Is what you see in a lot of cases, and giving people the elasticity of stuff, so that you can provide storage to people on a utility basis. If you've got the connections that are large enough, you can move stuff into there, move stuff in and out. With intelligent workflows, you can move stuff backwards and forwards between the states, between these large systems without any problems. You can replicate them to different cities and that sort of stuff. They aren't particularly hard problems to solve. It's much more about actually sitting down and getting the workflows right to move stuff around between them. I mean, cloud or no cloud, it's because all of this is IT and it's all data. You're moving it on and off disks into different places, and you need to plan it if you're talking about large volumes.
See, looping back to your first question, Colin, even if it were possible, who in the post-production market has got the money to actually try it out?
Yeah.
And who wants to take the business risk and try it out? Yeah. So, we've got folks like our colleagues at A-Frame who are building a new business around that, but that's different. That's a new business. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to kind of disrupt your own business model and take a risk like that. Sorry,
doing storage systems and that sort of stuff for productions where we're providing that as a utility. So for a feature film, they shoot the entire film, they're storing it in our storage systems. And you're talking in the order of 300 to 600 terabytes of data that they're generating over a short period of time. And they only run that for 6 months. And then we turn it off again.
So we're coming down on the side of the cloud being a business process management tool for post-production.
I don't know. I mean, I'm saying I think that. I mean, I think we're saying two different things. I think I'm seeing that's something that is if you like, a change which is easier to make.
Yeah.
I think what Ben's saying is that in many ways they've been providing cloud services for a long time. They just call something different.
And we've been moving people's render farms out of their buildings, which I guess are sort of more private cloud. But now you're starting to see people wanting to collaborate on moving their infrastructure closer to each other so that they can work on stuff. We've done stuff over the last summer where we're actually coming up to the last release cycle, where we had people running out of capacity, and they're actually sharing capacity between each other. So you take a very large render farm, chop it in half, and sell that other half onto a different company that was running out of capacity.
Yeah.
So that way they didn't have to buy for the peak anymore. They buy to what their utilization level is, and then they can take peak off other people.
Do you see growth in that sector being rapid, or
there's
is the
lots
slogan
of
gonna be
changes
up to-
happening quite quickly at the moment.
Yeah.
It's a model that's come of its time. Commoditization is happening, that you're actually getting to the commoditization of 10 gigs now cheap enough, and people are chucking it in lots of places, 40 gigs there, 100 gigs. So you can now start to provide these services between places at the right sorts of bandwidths.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you got. I think the other thing we're starting to do, and this is another really great thing about the open source community, is we're starting to see really effective tools that can make that happen to actually manage that that kind of whole virtualization of different environments and split it up. And there are lots of people in the marketplace that you can try things out with. I mean, I think it's exciting. I mean, like everything, there's we're at a certain part on the bollocksology curve. And we're probably, with the exception of certain services, we're probably not really at a kind of real pragmatic business point. But I think one of the things that we've said for a long time is that this is an industry where, if you look at things like sort of retail supply chain or financial services or any of those, the introduction of technology has actually made a massive difference to the way it's completely changed the way they do business. Whereas television in particular, we still kind of do it the same way we did, but with different technologies. So there's a big question as to are things like cloud and the rapid change in technology going to kind of finally give us more of a push to go somewhere?
The last 5 minutes is going to go one of two ways. It's either we're either going to get some questions, or I'm going to ask one more of you two guys. Do we have any questions?
I'm sure Eric has a question.
No? All right. Get your crystal balls out. And or is it just the way you're sitting? Where are we?
I gifted you that, by the way.
just that slight movement. Where are we heading? In as far as you can see, what will be happening over the course of the sort of foreseeable future in terms of all of the stuff that we've been discussing this morning? Is that too big and vague a question?
No, I think it's one of those unfortunate questions that takes a little bit of time to think about.
Yeah. Well, what are going to be the next big things, the next big developments? We've looked at what's worked in the recent past, and what is under development, and what hasn't quite worked out. What shows lots of promise?
Okay,
right now?
I think that's an interesting one, because I think it's interesting that Mr. Alden from VidiSpine has just turned up, because I think one of the things that that we're seeing as a change in the marketplace are things like services like media asset management starting to not be these big monolithic blobs, but actually sinking down into the infrastructure and becoming services. I think there's a next kind of evolution of that starting to come along with things like software-defined networks, software-defined radio, where we're actually going to start to morph out of this kind of weird hybrid of software and IT technologies and still some video technologies, and have things where, with software-defined networks, the intelligence and the processing is actually a function of just moving something from one to another, as opposed to these definite steps of moving it from here to do something with it and to do something else. So we're actually starting to get the speed and power in the network to be able to offer services as kind of, if you like, transformational, as opposed to kind of pots of stuff.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is the fact that the APIs are appearing for everything. Things that used to be vendor APIs are now appearing outside everything. So it's now how you glue everything together. When you're sitting there, as we jokingly say, writing hardware, as you're programming it to do stuff, where you can spin up massive infrastructures really quickly and tear them down again. So things that used to take ages, people installing stuff, all those sorts of stuff. If you had the disciplines, you could automate. Now there's massive libraries that do that. There's common APIs for doing that. And you can spin stuff up and down really quickly.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite a good point as well. We are actually finally starting to see, because if you look at the sort of the interesting outcomes of what was MXF, it's kind of, well, we've got the MXF standard. So here's a standard MXF file. That's great. Whose standard or whose implementation of? So we kind of didn't really make much, didn't really do that too well. But where we are, I think what we are starting to see now, which is quite interesting, is people starting to write software more robustly and really make their products integrable. Sorry, they are trying to give you those APIs and sensible APIs so that you can integrate them. And it's not just about, okay, we are X company. You're just buying into the X company ecosystem. We are X company, and we know we're part of a bigger supply chain. And if we want you to buy us, then we've got to make it easy for you to put it in with all the other things that we've got.
So
I think it's also interesting who's making the standards as well,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
that's
oh,
moving
don't-
away from the manufacturers. And
We
you're-
could sit here for another 45 minutes talking about standards.
Shall we
Well, no,
not?
But it's
I'm not talking about that
just
from
to
that
finish
side.
off.
It's who's doing it, because it's the end users now. It's not the manufacturers that are forcing them down in
Yes.
such
Yeah,
a way.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I see what you're saying.
Very good
so
point.
it's the decline of lock-in.
I hope so. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's. I think that there is. I think there are a lot of people who wish it would go away, but it isn't going to.
Yeah.
No.
And there are a lot of people, I think, who are embracing it. And you kind of see this because I can go and talk to, say, Adobe and say I want to integrate your stuff with some stuff we're doing, and they'll give me access to people, they'll give me SDKs, they'll pretty much give us whatever we want. You go and talk to X other vendor, for example, and it's like, well, can you submit a proposal to so that we can vet it and see whether you're doing something that we think? It's like, no, actually, I'm just not going to buy your stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big things that's really interesting that you can change now is if you look at the stuff that the BBC R&D guys have been doing.
Yeah.
That's the bits. Some of the bits of that make me really jealous. Where you just go, I can take the whole of Wikipedia, download that, use that as a classification engine for all of this stuff that I'm running OpenOCR on, and I can link it all together really simply. That all with open source tools, all now.
Anyway, we're going to have to call it a day. Thanks very much. Unless one of you slipped it in, we got through a whole 45 minutes without mentioning the word app or tablet, which
Yeah.
was
Well done.
quite an achievement in this
Yeah, you
modern
just did.
era. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ben.
No worries.
Enjoy the rest of the show.